My name's Russell Nohelty. I'm a USA Today best-selling author, most probably popular for my anthology series, Cthulhu is Hard to Spell, and also the comic books that I've created, Ichabod Jones' Monster Hunter, Katrina Hates the Dead, and Pixie Dust.
Hi, I'm Michael Tanner. I'm a writer best known for Junior Braves of the Apocalypse and Orcs in Space. Also, I host a podcast called Burn After Pitching.
Again, I'm trying to think of a way that I don't revitalize monsters. So here's the great thing about monsters is villains throughout history have always been coded as the other. So back all the way to demons, and back further than that. Like, it was always a way to talk about our fear of the other, our and concepts that we didn't understand. I mean, Godzilla is a great example of like how this evolves over time, and vampires are a great example. In Dracula, it was about the other, not just of disease, but of an immigrant bringing this disease to a new place, and then it morphed into all sorts of other things in the 20s and 30s, and before it sort of started coding in for AIDS, and the same sort of stuff happened with like Godzilla, which started as our fear of nuclear, like what would happen with like nuclear weapons, and then morphed into into all sorts of other things throughout the years. But these monsters have always been coded as the other, and so I think that for me, I often am spotlighting the monster as what they are perpetuating, what they are supposed to be, and then humanizing them or demonizing, like making people maybe fall in love with those monsters, or just make them three-dimensional characters. And I think that I talk about I was talking to my friend about Disney villains and how they're always coded as like LGBT characters, and tended to be like LGBT characters, LGBT humans tended to like imprint themselves on these characters that they were seeing, even though they were the villains. And it's by doing things to highlight how these monsters have been portrayed and humanizing them. It's sort of, hopefully, God, I feel like I'm talking in my butt here at this moment, but like I'm hoping to that it will be a stand-in for how we treat marginalized humans, and allegorical in a way that you can't have conversations when you just say these, like when you talk about Americans, or like there's always this other like black versus white, left versus right spin that you have to put on everything. But when you can remove that, and you can substitute monsters maybe on both sides, or monsters on one side, or you can sort of allegorically layer that stuff in, you can maybe influence certain people to change their minds, or at least eat away at the rot in their mind in a way that you couldn't if you just said, hey, like, here's this group over here, maybe you shouldn't be so terrible to them. So I think when I'm thinking about reimagining monsters, that's all the stuff that goes into my brain, but mostly just how we demonize the other. And like the demons that I meet, some of them are horrible in my books, but most of them like have their own goals and their own point of views that are somewhere in the shades of gray, just like everyone else.
For me, I'll focus on kind of the two monster types that I work the most with, and one is zombies. And zombies are the interesting thing because they are just people who have died and come back, and that's a lot of going beyond the surface reinvention of them, or fast zombies, or like mutated zombies, or that kind of thing, which is really just cosmetic and a little bit of added difficulty. The trope of zombie fiction is always that man is the real monster. I mean, that is the hallmark of zombie fiction, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just like there's nothing wrong with the chosen one tropes or magical girl stories. It's just that is the convention of the story. That's how the story exists. How we explore it is unique to each story. So you when humans are the real monster, you're always trying to figure out how to make that idea interesting. So you're reinventing how the humans are the real monster in a world where there are real monsters, which are the zombies. And that's entirely exploring different concepts of humanity. In Junior Brave, something we don't really hang a hat on too much is that each book is actually an exploration of different human political systems, which is an interesting thing to do in a YA kids fighting zombies book. But that's really the theme of going through each book in the series, is these kids kind of exploring how adults form societies and how they treat others within that society. And then talking about orcs, working on orcs in space. Orcs are a monster. Orcs are having a moment. A few years ago, it was kind of realized that even the fantasy concept of evil races, which goes back to Tolkien, is not something that really exists. Like there is not a real world component. And so fantasy creators really leaned on having the concept of evil races because it made it easy. If there's a kind of person or a kind of thing out there that is sentient but also just evil, it makes it very easy for storytelling because you don't need to explain why your heroes are killing these other people because they're evil. That's just how they are. And a few years ago, it was realized that wasn't necessarily a thing that should be put out there and put forth in the fiction and in the gaming systems. So orcs kind of got a reevaluation being looked at because they were clearly meant to be the other. They are clearly meant to be not just an other, but a foreign other. Orcs always kind of took concepts from tribal peoples, from Mongol hordes, like is this idea of like, oh, we'll just pull from these other cultures to create this evil race, and that's incredibly problematic and harmful. So orcs got kind of revitalized within the Dungeons and Dragons community, and now our book Orcs in Space is kind of using that idea of that orcs there's no such thing as an evil race, that idea doesn't exist, but you can play with the perception of that within stories, to kind of go your own way and to say something more. So that's how I could revitalize monsters in my work, is just trying to find new ways to tell those stories while kind of being mindful of how what we do is perceived and how it influences the world.
I want to also point out that part of revitalizing monsters is to relook at the good races too, or the good monsters. Like for instance, a lot of my work that deals with demons also deals with angels, and like angels, for every like bad monster, there's tends to be like a good monster. And elves have always been sort of like the good race in Dungeons and Dragons lore, and they are a monster. They may look more like humanity than orcs do, but like they still, if like monster is defined as like the other, like they are also the other, but like so also reevaluating and revitalizing sort of like how like, and I've really enjoyed especially how people have reimagined sort of elves in the last few years, about like you have these like high elves who used to be like the most noble race, and now they're kind of like snooty, and they're also like they like tend to be like capitalist, like and angels in my work in the Godsverse Chronicles are very much explored as like not just the like a good force of in the world as well, and that they all have their own. So it's not just about like reevaluating the orcs and the Draculas and the Godzillas of the world, but also looking at sort of the races that we that like had been coded as like the good ones, and making them like not worse, just more complex. Like there are bad orcs, there are bad elves, there are good, but like most of us, even if we're like good, we still have our tendencies to do things that are bad. We still have all of these things. So I think, it's not just, it's more about like taking the whole of the lore in fantasy and horror and sci-fi and like just making it feel more lived in and more nuanced than it has been in the last 100 years. I'm Russell Nohelty, USA Today bestselling author of Cthulhu is Hard to Spell, which I'm actually the editor of. I didn't write that. I'm the editor of the Cthulhu is Hard to Spell anthology series, creator and writer of Ichabod Jones' Monster Hunter, and The God's First Chronicles. You can find all of my stuff at russellnohelty.com.
I'm Michael Tanner, co-creator of Junior Braves of the Apocalypse, co-writer of Orcs in Space, host of the podcast Burn After Pitching. Please visit me on my website, which is bymichaeltanner.com.